Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Rewind-A-Dynamite. I am Jon Pollock. Joining me tonight in the hot seat, you know and love him, one of our big contributors during the G1 Climax who just wanted to come back for more. He wanted to get the authentic AEW Dynamite / Rewind-A-Dynamite experience. Bruce Lord is here with us. Bruce, how are you tonight?
Doing wonderful, John. Yeah, after coming on and discussing all manner of, relatively pat and by the numbers, Ujiro matches and whatnot, I thought, I've just been taking it easy, and I need to throw myself into the Mach 10 experience that is taking notes about and then discussing a breakneck episode of Rewind-A-Dynamite. Now, John, I know this is a jam-packed show that we have to work with. But as a couple of people have pointed out, the last couple of times that I've been on Rewind-A-Dynamite, I've been kind of derelict in my filling in for way duties. So I just kind of wanted to throw it out there, John. How's your day going? How was your day? How are you doing today?
I appreciate that very much. I don't know if anyone can notice this week, but I have been battling a bit of a cold that my 4-year-old son passed on to me last weekend. So I'm kind of getting over that. But I have to say today was a relatively it was going smoothly, and then the news kind of picked up like mid afternoon to late day. The news came down about Howard Brody passing away, so I wrote up a story about that. And for those that maybe have heard the name Howard Brody, he did you ever read his book, Bruce, or hear anything
No, I never
about
did.
it?
No.
So he put out a book in 2009 called Swimming with Piranhas, and it's one I definitely recommend for people that have any aspirations of ever working in this industry, because Howard Brody was somebody that just did like all these, like, it was just, he always seemed like he was on the verge of the big break, that next idea that was going to hit, and that was going to be his key to the industry of success. And it was always, these projects that, there would be some financial backer that fell through or something that just was not what it seemed. And this book, you're reading it and just going chapter by chapter. It's like, no, Howard, don't do it. And it's a brutally honest book about all of his experiences in the industry. So I know that's a bit of a tangent from how my day was going, but we do have a story up on the site about Howard Brody, but it's a book I definitely recommend. Like, it's a really fascinating from someone that did not get that giant break in wrestling, but still someone who had his hands in a whole lot of different areas of the industry. So he passed away. He had just had quadruple bypass surgery and sadly got an infection afterward. So he had been in a bad way over the last week or so. I believe he was about 62, so not that old either. So condolences to Howard Brody. But I throw it back to you, Bruce. How's your day going?
It's been, it was a very, very pleasant and relaxed day for me up until, Dynamite just absolutely kicked into gear.
What was this like for you? Because I know we've done you've done Dynamite on the past with Way. I don't know if you and I have done Dynamite, but just the note taking and boom, we're live 5 minutes later. What was that experience like for you tonight?
I mean, I feel as though, doing all of the G1 reports, my ability to actually track and take note of in-ring action has probably, been leveled up a little bit since the last time that I did one of these. But in terms of keeping up with actual angles, storylines, appearances, run-ins, and whatnot, even by the standards of Dynamite, this felt like a real jump. So I went from like having a very chill day, listening to some kind of dream pop sort of records, playing a little bit of MLB The Show, checking in on my baseball fantasy team, to just boom, okay. 2 hours of nonstop action, being glued to your chair, glued to Twitter, glued to your note taking the whole way through it.
Well, we are going to be getting into all of the news, both before Dynamite and coming out of Dynamite. There was plenty of it, but just a few housekeeping notes on Thursday. MCU Later is going to be back with WH Park and WH Park and Rich Fan, who are going to be going through episode 2 of She-Hulk. That will be out for all Post Wrestling Cafe members on Thursday night. Friday, I will be here with Kate from Montreal chatting SmackDown and Rampage. And then we've got WrestleNomics on Sunday. Monday, we're also going to be doing a special show. It's going to be a look back at the Bret Hart British Bulldog match. It took place 30 years ago. And I'm going to have Stephen Bell on. He was the author of the Dynamite and Davey book. And he did quite a lot of research on Davey Boy Smith, of course, for his book. So he's going to be on to chat about the legacy of that match and a lot of the circumstances surrounding that match. A very famous famous one from Wembley Stadium 30 years ago. So that's all coming up in the next couple of days. But let's dive into some news items. And Bruce, I wanted to start off first with just sort of your impressions, how much you've been keeping up with Dynamite, and specific to last week where everything was coming out surrounding CM Punk, just some of your observations over the last week, the coverage, and sort of your curiosity going into tonight's match with Punk and Moxley.
Oh, I think like everybody else, my curiosity was absolutely through the roof. Like a lot of people, I had, speculated, rather idly, I'm certainly not saying that this was definitely the case, but the possibility that the, apparent hot-shotting of the title match that was going to be happening tonight, the question of whether that was maybe done in response to kind of concerns about things kind of going off the rails with regards to, that receipt apparently being given to Hangman Page in a, unscripted, unprepared way on a live mic last week, right? So all sorts of questions about how this match tonight was going to be handled, all sorts of questions about what sort of control or what sort of backstage problems might be starting to kind of crop up with these various egos, different perspectives, the whole Colt Cabana issue. On the one hand, you can sort of say, okay, look, this is sort of indicative of people will say, oh, this is reflective of the worst elements of WCW or whatever it might be, this sort of chaos happening and spilling out onto mics or whatever it is. To my way of thinking, something like what we saw last week, it's maybe a little bit more measured in that, okay, fine, it isn't the completely scripted, completely prepared, completely rehearsed form of, promos and quote real world references that you have been getting and have been getting on main roster WWE product for the past 10 years or so. But I do think that there's a middle ground between that overcooked, over-prepared, over-scripted, over-rehearsed sort of product and, absolute chaos in which everybody is constantly going into business, for themselves. Based on the reaction that Punk got when he came out tonight, there were a lot of people who did seem to be kind of leaning into the heel direction that promo last week was going into. And I can't imagine that all of those people are necessarily 100% up to date on what all of the intimations of, the apology must be as loud and as public as the offense. I think that the heelish dimension that Punk was working with in that promo last week still got across, whether or not, you were privy to the whole Hangman business or not.
Yeah, I would say, and we talked about this a little bit last week, like this is one of the, I would say, positives people view of AEW is that this is not a company that has writers. They do not have promos that are written out for everybody. And that allows for a more organic type of presentation and personalities to come across. I would say where that line is crossed is where you are talking about an instance where Tony Khan does not know a direction that is going to be coming, or the target of a challenge impromptu in the ring does not know that is coming. And that to me comes down to a level of trust. Like how much trust can you put in this person that also doubles as your biggest star that CM Punk is in this company. So I would say, and to kind of juxtapose that to, reportedly where this stemmed from of like Hangman's promo, like that again was kind of trying to build up a match and perhaps crossing this either imagined or distinct line that Punk had a perception that it was crossed. I mean, that to me is more to your point of kind of going to the edge, and maybe in an unscripted environment, you are going to go over the edge with the intention of building a match. Last week, I saw that as something that, I mean, it's very hard to defend that as anything other than unprofessional. And before we get into the review, I mean, worth noting, like no Hangman Page on this show, nor like it was addressed in a roundabout way on Being the Elite, almost as like an out for Hangman Page, but like nothing to refer to it tonight at all for people that were seeking that out.
Yeah, no, it is. You're absolutely right in the difference between what Page did and what Punk said, and that one of those things leads towards a particular storytelling point, leads towards theoretically a money-making match for all involved. I guess my thing is just I sort of anticipate some degree of things like that. And you're right, it is unprofessional, but I do expect things like that to sort of fall between the cracks when you have egos like this, money like this, and whatnot. the question of whether or not you can trust those people on your live television, and the problem of when it is, as you're saying, absolutely your biggest money drawing star, and how do you sort of rein that in? Is this is maybe one of the bigger tests in terms of kind of backstage managing that Tony Khan has had to deal with. It has to be one of the biggest kind of curveballs that he's been thrown. Obviously, I think we are still sort of uncertain as to how that has been handled.
Right. Yes. And I would certainly say like it's a territory that I'm not a big fan of kind of going in like even if you take what happened last week and then the decision is, well, let's make money with this. Let's go in this direction. Like I do feel that there is a danger in going so much in kind of this direction that your audience is going to be so up on everything. And there was a very distinct line on tonight's show where Max Caster made reference to this talent meeting that was held. Crickets in this arena. And I think that was a real wake-up call that, there is an audience out there that, yes, that line might land perfectly and it's considered taboo or it really lands, but there's also a large amount of people that are not following to that degree. And I would want my storytelling to be as wide a net as possible that I'm trying to cast. And to me, that's sort of where we've detoured from this Punk Moxley angle that I would say 2 weeks ago, I was saying like, this is building up to be a tremendous pay-per-view main event, and we'll see what everyone's opinions are coming out of tonight and what they did. But just referring to this talent meeting, so it was reported earlier today that AEW was holding a mandatory meeting with talent in Cleveland, and some notes that have come out from Fightful Select and PWInsider.com mentioning the fact that Tony Khan, who was one of several people that spoke at this, came across. He was very fired up, talking about the lines of communication, having access to him. Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Jericho, and Shivani all spoke as well. And it was brought up that an email was sent to Nick Khan and Stephanie McMahon from their chief legal officer, Mega, about potential tampering with contracted talent. That was brought up, that allegedly they have notified Nick Khan and Stephanie McMahon, warning against this as well. So that was mentioned as well. So I'm sure that there will be maybe some more details to come out of this, but the fact that they felt the need that a kind of all hands on deck meeting was necessary, like there has been quite a lot out there about AEW and sort of keeping, I guess, people on the same page that this was necessary to get the talent all together and hopefully come out of it with at least get the management's message across to talent.
It's such an interesting, kind of time or period that we're in because, as people have been saying since AEW first, kind of got off the ground and, sort of revealed itself to be an actual legitimate enterprise that could competitively draw away, former WWE talent or WWE talent whose contracts were expiring. There's been all of this talk about, the great position that this puts talent in, right? And that there is somewhere else to hop over to, right? But of course, as we all know, that is going to go both ways, right? And I think that it's still way, 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 way too early to really have a sense as to what Triple H's vision of main roster WWE will look like in 1 year's time or in 2 years' time, or whether or not your projects like Gargano or Owens, or rebuilding Ricochet or whatever it is. There's still obviously a lot of things kind of in the works and up for grabs there. But in terms of larger interest, that people will now have possibly in either returning to the WWE or joining them for the first time, it makes for a really interesting time. I mean, I think we all know that kind of under the table contract tampering and kind of word of mouth, off the record discussions, have been part of this business going back decades. They've been part of pretty much all sports, going back decades as well in terms of college athletes or whatever else it might be. It's just a question of, well, it has to be off the record. And if there have actually been, kind of on the record emails sent from WWE.com corporate email addresses, that does seem to be another thing. But yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to sort of see how various talent measure themselves and whether or not they see themselves as being possibly able to do more or to advance themselves more back up in Stanford, right? We all know that these are people who are with the possible exception of Bryan Danielson, incredibly ambitious, incredibly self-motivated, right? And have to have a lot of faith in themselves to be willing to put themselves through the paces that it takes to get to kind of the upper tiers of this industry, right? So you have to, at least some part of you has to think that, yeah, if I am getting that call, from the big company up north, would I be better off up there? And I have to imagine a lot of them are looking at it that way.
How instrumental do you feel the Cody Rhodes move has played into perception and also reality? Because it's not just a, hey, here's an example of a talent going the opposite way, going back to WWE, but it's also correlated with, a business uptick for WWE. They had a very successful 2-night WrestleMania. Cody was, for all the skeptics of how he would be handled, I don't think you can possibly complain or be disappointed with the way Cody was handled. I mean, he was treated like a main event star from up until his injury, and I think will be once he comes back. And now with the switch in leadership in the company on top of it, I mean, this has been, to me, it's been a business upswing for WWE, but also the perception of WWE as a more engaging product. I think like the beginning process of that was like Cody coming over was a pretty eye-opening move that I think did get attention back on WWE from that fan that may have been jaded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that you had on the one hand the injury and then the changeover in leadership happening while Cody, was and remains on the shelf, I think has sort of kept us from really seeing, okay, just how far, were they willing to kind of, go all the way to the end zone after throwing Cody the ball, or whatever analogy or metaphor you'd want to use there. And we will have to wait and see sort of how he is presented when he does return. But I have to imagine that, Triple H is going to be able to look beyond, whatever sort of pride might still be left over from the throne smashing spot, and see that, that Cody is, and is very well positioned to be an absolute, top tier, if not champion, certainly a top tier contender. But I mean, I think he should be a champion in that company in the short to medium term future. So obviously, kind of the exact kind of object example that Cody was, I think everybody was looking to Cody to be. We still haven't kind of gotten the last little book or the last little word on how that's all going to shake out. But certainly the first, however many months it was of the utilization of Cody, the presentation of him, the way in which, they were able to actually weave in and acknowledge indirectly by WWE, or as direct as WWE ever will, acknowledge, where he had been for the past few years. I think everybody at the WWE recognized that this was a real kind of once in a lifetime, or at least once in the history of AEW opportunity, right? It's one of the founding figures of the company. It's somebody who has been presented as an absolute top tier person within that company, returning back as a prodigal son. And they knew that all eyes were going to be on them, were going to be on the handling of Cody. And if he was treated the way that, former WCW talent were post-invasion, if anything of that sort happened, it would have been a critical disaster for them. And they certainly wouldn't be in this position of, perhaps having some more receptive people in the AEW locker room if they are beginning to, send missives out and, put feelers out to some of those people right now.
And just to also just put a spotlight on what CM Punk spoke publicly about. He did an interview with Justin Barrasso at Sports Illustrated promoting tonight's match with Jon Moxley, and it was brought up about the comments levied at Hangman Page in last week's promo, and Punk's response was, "That's what I'm here to do. Make people want to see what happens next. I'm trying to sell tickets to the live events." That goes back to me saying Twitter isn't the real world. Twitter is a bunch of people that don't really care about your opinion. They want to find like-minded opinions that share their worldview. I'm trying to tell stories, sell tickets, and get people to tune in on Dynamite. So I guess the question would be, is he telling the same story that AEW is attempting to sell to the public? And is he, what tickets are being sold? I guess that would be the question. Not really addressing the meat of the question there about the comments towards Hangman Page. And if that is, like, I could see very well that this is a direction that they go after this, but I do not believe that was the intent, at least from where people expected the promo to be going last week with Punk, but that is his side.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's about him trying to sort of dovetail the conversation back into the Moxley match, and then if they do want to go in a Hangman direction afterwards, that's fine. But yeah, it's kind of a convenient out to sort of be using the like everybody's always working, brother, sort of line that he's using there. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's also very instructive for people that are watching all of this to be like asking just the basic question of what other answer would this person be giving? Like like, of course, you're going to ask like CM Punk this question, and you're not going to expect him to just, yep, I totally just went into business for myself. Like, you're not going to get that kind of an answer out of him. Nor am I going to expect to hear Tony Schiavone stating that, everything's perfect here. Like, of course, it's like he's not going to come out and, it's. I think people really like cling to this, and it's more so just reinforcing what their own beliefs are of where things stand. So it's an interesting time for AEW. I don't think they have ever been at this level. I think of the kind of microscope on their locker room, on their company culture, and where things are. Like, this is the first time that they have, I would say, hit a roadblock in terms of their growth that had sort of been in one direction. And now you have an ultra competitive WWE that I think is speaking to that fan that found AEW, where a lot of their mission statement was, we are not WWE. And now WWE is presenting a product that is bringing people back. It's got their attention, and it's in direct it's very much catering to the same fan that AEW has. So it's a very interesting period for AEW of how they navigate.
It's the first time that they've really been on the defensive, and we can maybe even talk a little bit about, when we get into discussion of tonight's episode, the degree to which one of their kind of current storylines or angles, how that intersects with WWE's presentation of itself, and whether that's still
Right.
accurate or not. But I guess the thing for me is that, like, something like this was always sort of going to happen, I feel, and like there was, I think AEW enjoyed a very long honeymoon period, both in terms of, the acquisitions that they made, and ultimately just the real quality of the actual, pay-per-views and in-ring wrestling product, right? They kept delivering at that score for such a long period of time that I don't think those of us who had been so disenfranchised from the WWE for a lengthy period of time ever really felt the need, to sort of like go back and check back in. I do think, not to be kind of a wet blanket on a lot of the kind of the uptick, and people like you and Braden and whatnot who've been talking about Raw and SmackDown over the last little while. I do think that, the WWE is enjoying something of that as well right now. Right, that people are responding to, hey, there's actually wrestling on WWE, or like, oh yeah, they use the word wrestler, hurrah, or oh, this, the hometown person won, and
There's
these
a
are all
lot of easy wins. Like, just
exactly,
like
yeah.
literally turning the lights on are going to be wins for your audience right now, and you're very much in that honeymoon period.
Yeah. So I mean, to be honest, like I have not gone back and watched, 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown, and to be frank, it's probably going to take a hell of a long time. And the ousting of Kevin Dunn, or at least his philosophy of shooting television, to get me to actually do that after all of these years. So I cannot speak with authority to this. But I do feel that, as you're saying there, just any sort of turnaround of the ship, any sort of improvement is going to be viewed as just a mammoth uptick, whereas it is probably just the beginnings of, starting to dig back up, to use the Simpsons image a little bit.
So that's going to transition us over to Dynamite from tonight at the Wolstein Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And there will obviously be a lot of news coming out of this show, and a ton of announcements for All Out as well. So we will look at that updated card at the end. But on commentary tonight, Jim Ross, Excalibur, Taz, and Tony Schiavone. We had a 4-man booth at certain parts when Tony Schiavone got time in between interviews, the busiest man on these Dynamite tapings. Chris Jericho starts at the show, and last week he said that one of his favorite Jericho Appreciation Society members, Daniel Garcia. I thought that was such a great subtle line. That's like me saying, one of my favorite people on this stream with me, Bruce Lord. One of my favorites.
One of the favorite people that I live with, one of my favorite dogs, yeah, exactly. It's, there's so many, but amongst all of them, Garcia's pretty good.
He said that he wants to work out these problems with Daniel Garcia face to face. So he introduces his future champion and protege, Danny. And out comes Danny, who, this guy, I always thought, his body language is just phenomenal. He comes out, he's all nervous, he's looking conflicted, and he doesn't have the Kangol hat on. He's just wearing regular attire and comes in, and the "You're a Wrestler" chant takes off. And this chant is going to follow him after last week. It was great to hear this Cleveland crowd pick it up and continue with it.
It also kept going on Dark, actually, just a couple of days ago, when he had a really good match with Weston Blake, the former dubstep cowboy and NXT Tag Team Champion. So the fact that it just that it jumped over to Dark, just whatever it was, 2 or 3 days after Dynamite. And that sounded, at least to me, last week on Dynamite, it sounded like a legitimate, just organic chant that sort of broke up there. So kudos to whoever thought that one up, because they have organically struck upon the defining narrative, I think, that we will see for the ascent of Garcia as a major player in AEW. You can put it on a shirt, you can chant it. It tells you everything about what everybody wants for such a young and exciting talent.
Jericho says that he knows Garcia's emotions were high last week after the match with Danielson. "I just want an apology." And the crowd boos this notion. Garcia says that he knew how important that moment was, sharing the ring with his hero, Bryan Danielson. "And I hung with him for 30 minutes. With the best wrestler in the world," saying this all to Jericho's face. "I had always dreamt of having that type of match. All that I cared about was that moment when Danielson reached his hand out to give me his respect, and you ruined it." Jericho says, "You're going to have plenty more moments just like that. You are the best technical sports entertainer," which elicits more boos from the crowd, and says, "I want to hear you say that you're a sports entertainer." And before Garcia can answer, Bryan Danielson comes down. Danielson says that Garcia can be whatever he wants to be, but he agrees with the audience. He's a wrestler. And Garcia gets upset that he's being put on the spot in front of all these fans, and Jericho grabs him, but then he gets shoved down to the mat by Garcia. Crowd is chanting, "You deserve it," and Garcia just storms off, goes to the back, leaving Jericho with Danielson. And Danielson notes that, "I'm not much of a sports entertainer, but that was pretty entertaining." Jericho is sick of hearing about Danielson as the best wrestler. "I don't see it." And he puts over his own longevity, reinvention, and being a survivor of Stu Hart's dungeon. And he knows more about wrestling than Danielson ever will. So Danielson asks, "Who would Stu Hart say is the better wrestler between us? Who would your hero Owen Hart say is the better wrestler? And if we wrestled here in Cleveland, who do you think would win?" So Jericho agrees to a match on September 4th at All Out. The fans are pissed. But Jericho warns him that, "I choked you out at Anarchy in the Arena and put you out for 2 months," and warns him to watch his back when Jake Hager jumps Danielson to end the segment. So one of many match announcements for All Out. I think everyone saw this being the match for All Out. I'm very curious to see Daniel Garcia's involvement in this and what comes out of it for that Buffalo Dynamite. It just seems everything is in alignment for something really big with Garcia on that show.
A whole lot to like about this, at least in terms of its utilization of the three main talents here. The fact that you sort of almost have, Garcia as the belle of the ball or whatever, with these two guys, the handsome jock and the cool chain smoking greaser outsider, like fighting for his attentions, as to who who's going to go to the prom with her. You had that. It's a minor point, but when Danielson came in, Taz on the commentary was saying, Danielson's being such an instigator. And obviously Danielson is the face here, and obviously Taz is there to be a heel commentator, but to a certain degree, he's right. Like, we all love Bryan Danielson, but he can have that slightly smarmy, holier than thou attitude and smirk on his face that he had while all of this was going on, just like watching, one of his enemies, scions, begin to turn against him and everything like that. Like, obviously he's there to stir the pot, and I liked that, that he was still kind of allowed to have that slightly kind of, again, holier than thou edge to it. The match itself should be great. The fact that it obviously calls back to the Danielson injury angle that we saw a few weeks ago, which, whether real or not, I mean, that's the whole leg trapped in the guardrail thing. the fact that they were able to kind of pick that thread back up, and now with the added stakes, sort of the affections or destiny of young Daniel Garcia being attached to this, was all really good. And the fact that Garcia, I thought, came across as really just honest and likable, right? Like he is in a really difficult position here as the younger person who has respect and admiration for these people. And it sucks, whether it's in a professional capacity or an academic capacity or whatever, when, you're younger and people that you respect and admire are sort of using you as a pawn in their own fight, right? I think that's a really relatable position, maybe for, I don't know, for people whose parents went through a divorce or something like that. So I thought just the basic essential humanity of Garcia's position came across really well here as well.
Yeah, so a good segment to set up the match, and I guess curious to see how Daniel Garcia is kind of woven into this, because he's sort of he's like to me, he is the focus of this, and it's like these two are the ones having the match. So, but I think Daniel Garcia, this has done him a lot. It's not just like you got the 2 out of 3 falls match last week, but it's a lot of the character work that has stood out the most for me with Daniel Garcia, that he's really stepped up into this role, and it's working, and the audience is taking to him in a big way.
The wrestling's been there from the beginning, but the character stuff, you're exactly right. Sorry, John, just 2 other thoughts that came out of this. One, the irony of, an angle that is all about, wrestling being superior to sports entertainment being used to start a 15-minute talking segment at the beginning of an episode of Dynamite, unlike the match that they normally start with. And then the question that we were sort of alluding to a few minutes earlier, does this whole Jericho Appreciation Society, sports entertainment, which path is Garcia going to go down? Does that has a bit of the wind been taken out of that story's sails, given how overt and obvious the WWE has been with, throwing sports entertainment as a phrase out with, Drew and Kevin Owens leaning into the whole "we're wrestlers, so let's wrestle" sort of thing? Do you feel as though there's maybe a shorter shelf life on this whole angle than there might have been a month or two ago?
I actually think if you were to really put some deep thought into it, that they could make this Jericho Appreciation Society as almost this to take some shots at how that's kind of the perception of WWE, and that they can actually illuminate a lot of the tropes that still exist in WWE, a lot of the quick camera cuts, and just other aspects that almost shine a light on WWE still being a very overproduced product that is sort of getting a lot of praise at the moment, that they could still incorporate into this. But I understand what you're saying. Like, this is, WWE is very much, I think, shifting that narrative where this was just a slam dunk, easy heat type of faction before, and now you are kind of changing that perception. But I do feel there's still elements that they could shift this with, but it also makes you question kind of the longevity of this group just in general, where the guys have, especially 2.0 and Garcia, they benefited a lot from this. And with Garcia, I don't know if it would be kind of a lost opportunity if this all just ends up in Garcia back in his spot, and this is more designed to be a way down the road exile from the Jericho Appreciation Society. Like, the time might be now.
Yeah. You could drag it out for a little bit, but I wouldn't want to go too long with it, just because of how hot the crowd is behind Garcia right now.
Jim Ross thinks this is going to be the greatest Dynamite ever. We're going to see the unification of the titles. And then Shivani adds, we're also going to see father versus son. So 1A, 1B tonight on the priority list. Unifications and father versus son. But starting things off is Dax Harwood against Jay Lethal. And Lethal sends Satnam Singh and Sanjay Dutt to the back. And we start this off. Head scissors by Lethal, headlock takeover by Dax, and then they get into lighting each other's chests up with these huge chops, just one after the other. Lethal slips out of the corner and uses a side Russian leg sweep off the second turnbuckle. And it was notable here, they did not go to their first picture-in-picture break until 21 minutes into the show, and it seemed that they were really just like, that first quarter is always typically the biggest. And I think that's certainly an ability to just keep that audience for as much as possible. That's going to swell that first hour. It's, this is a show that with Punk and Moxley, 6 months ago, you would have been banking this is going to do easily a 0.4 in the demo. like they have really struggled to come
Mm-hmm.
anywhere near that over this summer. Just looking at the numbers, like they have not hit a .4 since June the 1st, which was that forum show right after Double or Nothing. So, and that's been with some big matches over recently with the Quake by the Lake and tonight. But this will certainly be a number that is greatly dissected by people. But it was 21 minutes here before we went to a break. Afterwards, Lethal used the lethal combination for a 2 count, dragon screw through the rope, and suicide dive. He applies the figure 4. Dax gets to the rope, and then it's Dax who stops a second figure 4 attempt, going for the sharpshooter. Lethal fights it off with up kicks, and Lethal attacks his quad. Lethal injection gets blocked, and Dax hits a slingshot into a Liger bomb. Big near fall as the crowd is with it. And Dax gets the sharpshooter when Sanjay Dutt reemerges, appears on the apron. Dax runs into him. There's a roll up for a 2 count. O'Connor roll out of the corner, and it leads to a cover that is a roll up that is reversed by Jay Lethal as he hooks the trunks, grabbing them, of Dax Harwood and catches him in 12 minutes and 50 seconds.
Between the dragon screw, the springboard crossbody, and then just all of the roll up and kind of sit down counter roll ups, I was like, okay, somebody's been watching all of their G1.
Yeah, Dax did the reverse cross here, and they made a big point of the fact that it's desperation time when FTR are coming off the rope. So they got the most out of a reverse cross off the second rope. I mean, there's a lesson there for wrestlers as well.
Definitely. I mean, look, contrary to the promo that I think he cut last week, I don't believe necessarily that Dax is the wrestler of the year, but he's damn sure wrestling like someone who believes that he is. Especially this really got into gear with all of those chops that you were saying to kind of the neck and chest and throat, and it had that real sense of brutality to it. I have been a little hot and cold with the whole Lethal Dutt Singh trio, and we'll get to that in a minute here. In that,
you're not the only one,
apparently, yeah. And the whole larger image of Wardlow powerbombing, saying, okay, fine, that's something to work towards or get towards at some point. But not everything, all of the incremental steps along the way have really landed. But this was just a really, really solid opener in terms of actual wrestling. Again, all the hard hitting chops, some nice reversals towards the end, very enjoyable stuff.
Yeah, I mean, these two, this looked good on paper. This was an enjoyable match. And after the match, Dutt says that he never said who would be the opponents for FTR and Wardlow at All Out. So Jay Lethal is teaming with 2 close friends of theirs, and they announced that the Motor City Machine Guns will be teaming with Jay Lethal at All Out. So a very interesting change in that they look to be looking at match quality over what was a match built around the spot. Like you had Satnam Singh cut the promo, powerbomb me. And that's still something you could go to in the match, but it seems like that is not the selling feature anymore. They just want to have a kick-ass trios match, which when this match was announced, it seemed like there were more people down on this with like FTR kind of in a throwaway match where the focus was Wardlow and Singh.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, it's Shelley and Sabin. We all know what that sort of represents in terms of in-ring product, and obviously, this is just a continuation of the whole extended mash note to classic ROH that Tony Khan has been penning over the last few months, and this is only going to drive up more speculation and more questioning of, okay, well, what does ROH actually look like? Is it on a streaming platform? Is a TV deal still something that's a remote possibility? All of those sorts of questions, which everybody, and Brandon Thurston on WrestleNomics and all sorts of people have been chewing over. But in the short term, I'm really somewhat shocked at the fact that, to look at this says to me that in addition to the whole question of, how much of a hot pan do we want to play with FTR, because they are the hottest tag team in the business right now. But leaving that aside, Singh has been such a project of theirs. I was on Rewind-A-Dynamite, I believe, with Way on the night of his big debut in the middle of that Joe, at the end of that Joe confrontation to close the show. And it really kind of puzzled and stymied me then. And I'm a bit puzzled and stymied at his lack of appearance or his, lack of inclusion here. If you don't trust this rookie prospect, this giant in the works that you have, to be hidden in the back of a 6-man tag that includes FTR, Jay Lethal, and even Sanjay Dutt as a veteran there, I'm not sure what else you can really do with him then. Is he kind of like going back for more seasoning? Is he in a position where he shouldn't be checking his email for the next couple of days? I was really quite flummoxed by this.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to look at the two giants, Satnam Singh and Omos, and their
Yeah.
and what their trajectory is going to be. But it was very notable because this all seemed built around the power bomb spot, and this seemed like, no, we're going to take a sharp turn, and this got a big pop with the machine guns in an AEW ring for the pay-per-view, and it's certainly going to be a much better received match than the original. So you have to look at it as an upgrade there, although I think your points are valid. Like, they were building in a direction, and you can still do Wardlow and Singh, but maybe that's that's a television match that,
Yeah.
really it's the spot that you are selling people on. Shivani is with Thunder Rosa, who just looks heartbroken and announces she has to step down as champion due to injury, and an interim champion will be crowned at All Out. She says she hopes that Toni Storm's dreams come true. She's coming back better and stronger than ever with a chip on her shoulder. And Excalibur noted it will be a four-way match at All Out with Toni Storm, Britt Baker, Hikaru Shida, and Jamie Hayter. And much like when CM Punk made his announcement about his injury, it seems like the verbiage is very confusing, because the fact that it is an interim champion, I take this as she keeps the title, although she said she was stepping down as champion. But I see this as she's coming back and not relinquishing the title.
It was a little bit unclear to me as well. And I think the fact that this, seemed like a completely 100% legit and probably very recent, injury that just, has hit Rosa.
They just
out of
they
the
just
blue.
had it was funny because they have like the results going down there. It's like Hikaru Shida just lost in a tag match on Dark, which was this past weekend. So I mean, that would suggest to me that this came about rather quick.
So it could just be a case of, Rosa's own emotions, kind of getting in the way of the, word by word messaging that they might have been wanting to communicate. And hell, we've seen how, just the slightest ambiguity about the wording of an interim champion can be used to build a whole lot of steam for a match later on, and to put, as Rosa was saying, a bigger chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, for sure. So we will look to find out more about this injury. Hopefully, it's not too serious. The fact that they're doing an interim title, you would hope that that's not too long of a period that she'll be out of action. But hopefully, a quick recovery for her. But now it's time for the main event: father versus son. Billy Gunn against Colten Gunn, the match that you've all been waiting for. The Acclaimed come out with Billy, and Max Caster does his rap, stating that Billy should have used a condom. He said, "We're going to give a savage beating so much that they'll have to call another town meeting." And you heard him like stop. Dude, the crowd reacted to all his lines, but this instantly took everyone back to Eric Bischoff. "What's wrong, Sid? Can't find your scissors?" And then repeating it into the microphone like, "Oh, it must be the microphone that's not working. They didn't hear me because this is a zinger." No, there was nothing to this reaction, and then ended it saying that they're going to wipe them out like Biden did student debt.
Yeah, thankfully they had that. Thankfully the locker room meeting line was not the final punchline. There was at least one more bar to come,
Yes.
because that was left hanging. To be honest, it took a few seconds for me, as a terminally online wrestling person, to even remember that and draw that line. So yeah, I can't imagine that it went over very well for most people.
A lot of daddy ass chants at the beginning. They spent all picture in picture on the floor with Colten being run into the guardrail. Austin tries to grab at Billy when he's getting into the ring. Colten takes over, and then Stokely Hathaway attacks Max Caster with the boombox. Austin takes down Anthony Bowens, and it leads to a low blow by Colten and the Colt 45 as he pins his father in 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Stokely hands Austin and Colten cards. They take them, and then they proceed to stomp down Billy and the Acclaimed when Swerve in Our Glory run down, the Guns exit, and the tag team champions stand alongside Billy Gunn and the Acclaimed.
I can't imagine what your reaction would have been, John, if I'd predicted before this episode of Dynamite started that the match between Billy Gunn and Colten Gunn would go about twice as long as the unifying world championship
A great point.
match.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this was obviously leading towards the angle, but even at 6 minutes, I felt like this was just kind of long. Just the brawling outside around the guardrails was pretty lame. Like, if the other guys were watching, the Tanahashi matches in the G1, we were getting a whole lot of like Evil and Kenta, flashbacks for me here with just the long guardrail spots. The crowd started chanting, "Who's your daddy?" at one point, and I'm like, that doesn't work. We know who his daddy is. It's him. He literally is. Monty Sop is this kid's father. There's nothing figurative or metaphorical, or there's no sexual innuendo there. To be honest, I've never really been that high on the Gun Club in terms of in ring. I think the heel turn for them a while ago was the smart move to do. But there just really, really wasn't much here apart from leading towards this angle, hooking them up with Stokely, and then the whole acclaimed, leading the acclaimed into the swerve in their glory angle further on.
Yeah, it's like when you piece together this whole storyline with the Gun Club and the acclaimed, like it has just been so laden with angles on top of angles, like turns, like multiple times. We've had Billy and the Gun Club turn on the acclaimed. Then the Gun Club turns on Billy. We've had the Gun Club tossed off in dumpsters and come back the next day. It's just, there's just a lot that's been piled onto this. Like, the Gun Club has their role, especially as heels, but I don't know. There's a lot of time dedicated to this, and at the end of it, it's a pay-per-view match that has nothing involving the Gun Club. So I don't know if it's necessarily like the investment is if you have the payoff at the end of it all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the short to medium term project here should be the acclaimed, and the whole, scissor me thing is over like Rover right now. So that's all fine and good. But I don't know that this path towards this tag team match is the one that has built them up to be the most credible in terms of in ring, and that's a shame because I really, especially Bowens. I am such a fan of Bowens' work in ring. I think he's often overlooked for his actual match quality. So hopefully the ultimate match will be good.
Shivani is with both sets of trios for tonight. Ospreay brings up the 2019 30-minute draw he had with Pac in Rev Pro, and Pac says they've waited too long for this opportunity, and they have decided they aren't going to kill them tonight. They're going to murder them.
That's really a kind of a thorny jurisprudence question, kind of dealing with like intent, state of mind. I'm not sure that we, the average wrestling viewing public, would be capable of differentiating between those different actions. We need Smart Mark Sterling or some other legal figure to be able to break down and delineate killing versus murder in a wrestling ring.
Pac was the swing vote for his team, went with murder. Dr. Britt Baker against KiLynn King. They did a great angle with these two on Dark. Like KiLynn King, they put her in the main event. She won quick, but more importantly was they gave her promo time. I thought she did really well with the promo, and then having Britt Baker show up. And I just thought we should get more of this for matches that maybe on paper aren't jumping off the screen for Dynamite each week. But I thought this angle was great on Dark, and I was very impressed with KiLynn King's promo.
Absolutely. I had the exact same note here after watching Dark earlier this week. As a dedicated Dark viewer, I'm always happy to see, let's say the underdogs, who are often given a winning match on Dark to set up, a match against a champion or a former champion on Dynamite or Rampage. That's a convention that they've long used. But it was just great to see, actual like FaceTime between both of them, to see Britt come out and to set up the actual match on Dynamite with that angle. In her promo, KiLynn was talking about the fact that, she was one of the people who was, on Dark a lot in the early days and in the lockdown days, but wasn't getting as many calls, once they went back to touring and once live crowds sort of came back, and how she's had to kind of grit and, climb and fight her way back onto a spot like Dark. So yeah, I thought it did a whole hell of a lot here on Dark to set up this match.
So there's chance of Baker sucks at the beginning. She pulls KiLynn King's arms around the post from the floor, and they're noting the fact that King grew up 30 miles from here. And King gets sent into the corner, super kick, stomp, and then on goes the glove and lockjaw in 355. It almost felt like the angle, like you were hoping like King would get a little bit more in this match, but this was largely, it was 4 minutes, and it was a pretty dominant win for Britt Baker.
You could have, in my mind, you could have stolen about 3 minutes from the previous match and stuck it onto this one, because I thought it was a much better built one. Because yeah, I mean, I like King's in-ring work, but obviously with the announcement of the Rosa injury and,
Yeah.
and Britt's upcoming spot, they needed to get to that.
Baker says she wrestled as champion with a broken wrist because that's what a champion does. And Toni Storm comes out. She gets jumped by Jamie Hayter and nailed into the apron. Rebels got a terrible towel for Baker, and then Hikaru Shida runs down. And so we have all 4 women that are in the 4-way, and we will get a tag match with them next week on Dynamite.
I think it might have been Pittsburgh sucks rather than Britt sucks that the chant was there. I don't know if they're building on the the longstanding Pennsylvania Ohio sports rivalries or whatnot. I wasn't super nuts about the kind of each person, each contender having to like come down to the ring one by one, very WWE style. But given the short amount of time that they had to work on here, I was fine with it, and I'm very happy that Hayter's going to be involved.
Shivani's with Swerve in Our Glory and the Acclaimed. They love the Acclaimed and note that they are ranked, and Keith Lee says that they are worthy opponents. Max Caster says they don't need their praise. We're the best homegrown team in AEW and the winningest team, and Bowens calls them uncrowned champions that are going to take the belts at All Out. So that is our tag program for the pay-per-view that is set up.
I love the fact that after they said everybody loves the Acclaimed, you had a very mortified Swerve just saying, "Huh, not anymore," after they'd been so rude to them. I like that little touch.
And next, CM Punk and Jon Moxley going at the start of the second hour. And I mean, this crowd was going nuts as these two made their entrances. It felt like a very big match, and we get the crowd roaring as the bell rings, and they're chanting back and forth. Jim Ross noting the stiff collar and elbow tie-up that they're engaging in, and then they go into shots from Moxley in the corner. Punk fires back, and then Punk fires off a head kick and goes down holding his shin. And what was interesting was he did kick with the right leg and then grabbed the left. So Paul Turner is checking on him, and Moxley doesn't give him any reprieve, kills him with this lariat, drops down the elbows, and then bends the foot of CM Punk and hits him with one Death Rider, follows with a second Death Rider, and Jon Moxley pins CM Punk in 3 minutes and 9 seconds. They're asking, what happened? JR says he got his ass whipped. That's what happened. And Jon Moxley gets a dominant win, and they are telling the story that Punk came back too soon and he can't get up. He's down for a long time. Ace Steel is out there as Moxley celebrates in the crowd. You had the great juxtaposition of Moxley holding up the belts. Everyone's going crazy. Punk is watching as he can't even put weight on the foot as he is carried to the back, and probably not the outcome people were expecting in terms of this type of a finish, and especially going as short as they did. And I'm curious your opinion on how this came across in terms of a very, very ballsy idea.
I mean, I think it came across as incredibly shocking and as riveting as they'd hoped it would, as very clearly, they sort of had set up, as you're saying, with the framing of each of them leaving out of the different entrances. Again, I'm guessing, just back to the point about the kick. Again, I'm guessing the point was like the pivot on the left foot.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah,
like, I didn't think it was necessarily a mistake. It was more so just like he torqued the foot. But regardless, I mean, that was kind of what they were saying.
I mean, I'm sure your Twitter feed was exactly the same as mine, when this happened, with just like stunned reactions across the board. We all spent the entirety, of kind of last week debating the pros and cons of giving away your pay-per-view main event on television, and to quote a great man, just when, we thought we knew the answer, they changed the question. And there are a whole hell of a lot of questions coming out of here. Are we getting, a rematch of some sort, maybe with Punk putting up some sort of retirement stake, as some people have suggested? Is Punk still legitimately hurt, and does he need to go back on the shelf? Is he leaving the company? Is this, was the booking of the booking of him to be so weak and injured done as, punishment for kind of stepping out of line or, veering out of lane on television last week? How does MJF factor into this, if at all? That was my sort of guess as to where we were going, that something to do with this match was going to be used to reintroduce MJF. And all of that seems to be entirely open right now. I think it was Kate on Twitter was sort of saying, and now here's the moment when we all sort of, like to lie and pretend that we can see where this is going. And I can't. I don't see where this is going.
Well,
John, you're always
is that a good thing or a bad
well,
thing when you are selling a
yeah.
pay-per-view in a week and a half?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a big question right there. I mean, we saw just how much was set up for All Out on today's show, and some of it was predictable, and some of it less so. With the women's match and whatnot. I'm not sure if they believe that they are in a position where the pay per view or the name will sort of sell itself at this point, or if whatever else they are going to be doing presumably, you have to imagine that there has to be a heavyweight title match on that pay per view, or if they have such faith in whatever comes next, whatever step we get in 1 week's time, presumably on Dynamite in 1 week's time, then on 4 days' notice to set up interest in the pay per view.
I would say I was surprised in the sense that we went off the air without an indication of where the pay-per-view, what the match will be. I would say, and in a lot of cases, I wouldn't look at it as, life or death, but this is a Chicago pay-per-view. You have sold a lot of tickets, and you would go off this show and certainly be questioning if CM Punk is going to be on that show or not. It's hard to fathom him not being on that show, but you could easily draw that conclusion. Nor has any opponent been set up for Jon Moxley. So if you revert back to the idea of doing this rematch, do you feel this was enough of a shocking finish that it enhances if they announce the rematch for All Out?
If there's some sort of stakes attached to it, either, some particular stipulation, possibly including, a Punk retirement, as some people have talked about, then okay, maybe, right? Then the possibility of, CM Punk's last match / last AEW match in Chicago, that does sort of have that thing attached to it. It's so funny because, heading into last week, I felt that the previous week's Dynamite had shown that this was a match that needed essentially no buildup, right? Nothing other than just, Punk coming out and then Moxley just shoulder checking him on the walk out of the ring. I'm like, great, fine, perfect. That minimal amount of contact, inset promos and or one face-to-face confrontation. Boom, we're off to the races. And this is all going to be gravy heading into Chicago. I mean, ambiguity in and of itself, if it is logical, and it stems from this story that they are telling of Punk coming back too soon, re-injuring his foot. And that was something that was, feathered in throughout the rest of the night in other matches as well, right? That was clearly the narrative that we are getting from this, right? That, it wasn't as though CM Punk's name just vanished, the second he walked outside of the ring. So, ambiguity in and of itself, not necessarily a bad thing. Trying to do, a more sports-based, this guy came back too early, just like Kenny Omega. And unlike Kenny Omega, didn't have two friends to sort of help him out and back him up. And, fell down, far, far quicker than any of us could have expected. There's the possibility of that turning into a really interesting match. I'm, certainly AEW storytelling up until this point has earned enough credit with me that I have to imagine that if this is planned out and is not just a very quick reactive kind of, panicked reaction to recent circumstances to do with contracts or to do with Punk and the company or whatever it is, I have to imagine that there's at least some plan in place, some actual story that will come out of this. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The fact that we went off the air and none of us are really any the wiser as to what the pay-per-view is going to look like has to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah, I really cannot fathom this pay-per-view happening without Punk, unless there is some extreme extenuating circumstance. And I would have wanted to make that clear enough. Because I would say if like you're someone on the fence about buying a ticket for this show, the lineup's really nice, but I think you're also kind of, I would want to have my main event out. And I do believe Tony Khan does not believe like we have to have our card locked in 6 weeks out. And he's brought up the fact like last year at All Out, it was pretty much, a 2-week build for CM Punk. And they did Omega and Christian coming back really quickly after that Rampage match. I would just say that you need, to me, like a hell of a hook if you're going to wait till the go home TV on Wednesday to sell people on this, and to go to the extreme of like Punk putting his career on the line or something like that. Like that is That's pretty significant. Like I don't know. I'm kind of, the jury's out on this one. It was certainly stunning. I think it grabbed people's attention. I like doing things that are different. It also, the fact that a title match goes 3 minutes is not the worst idea to do every now and then to change things up. Like we talked about with some of like the G1 booking, it sort of educates your audience to understand that things can come at any point in the match. It makes it that much more important. And it very much plays off of like finishes we see all the time in MMA, where sometimes it's just, let's go all in on one guy. He gets 100% of this match and he comes off like Superman. And it's the other guy. It's like, wow, how is this guy going to come back from this humiliating defeat? And I don't think it was lost on people that this wipeout was done in Cleveland, the same city where Mickey Gall pretty much did the same thing to CM Punk.
There we go. See, I was wondering if there was some sort of, I was kind of getting a little bit of an MMA vibe off of it, and specifically him limping off afterwards. I hadn't put two and two together with one of his, 2 matches that he fought? Is that correct?
Yeah, it was his first fight at UFC 203 with Mickey Gall, which was actually shorter than this, where he got choked out.
I remember popping out of a friend's wedding to like pull it up on a phone, popping out of the reception to sort of see what had happened with that fight. And I remember sort of thinking like, oh, I can almost see the entire match in one animated GIF. All right.
So that was obviously the most newsworthy thing on the entire show. And you come out of this with obviously the questions of where this goes with the rematch that I think people would still expect, because I do not know, like outside of Punk, your options to do such a quick build for. I don't think I would want to waste an MJF on that, but and it's not like there's this long list of names out there that you could just hotshot and put in there on a couple days notice. So I would until it's like said otherwise, like I would expect the rematch at All Out.
Yeah, I mean, Stips or not, I think that's still the biggest match that they can pull, and it's just the question is whether or not they can put a different spin on it after such a decisive loss that'll make it feel legitimate or have some extra stakes or a new angle to it.
Do you think any of this is sort of a pressure that Tony Khan feels to keep that streak going of each pay-per-view outdoing the same years the last year? Like, this is the one where, I mean, it's going to take, I won't say a miracle, but it's going to take a significant upswing to beat last year's All Out. Like, I think most see the streak ending here. Do you see him being reactionary to that and wanting to, like, believing that he's got this ace in the hole that is going to drive those buys up in that last week?
I just don't see there being, I mean, I respect the fact that, they've been touting it and, like advertising that increase in buys, as they should. I just don't see there being anything with this roster, barring the sudden signing of Dwayne Johnson himself. I do not see there being any stipulation, even a possible Punk retirement that could possibly, draw as many buys as Punk's first match did. That was just such an incredible moment, and it got so many lapsed fans back into the wrestling fold. Like, I respect the fact that maybe Tony's thinking, oh, well, I got to come within spitting distance of that or something like that, or getting 90% of those buys. I don't see there being any way of beating that record. I think they're just gonna have to let that one go.
I'll tell you now that you have introduced it on television and it's canon, like that retirement stipulation, it works a whole lot better where it's Hangman Page on the other side with the line of, I am going to save AEW from you. And who better than the guy that could rid AEW of CM Punk than Hangman Page? Like, that's the story you have now introduced on your television, that it kind of, that would be optimal in that sense. But yeah, worth noting the fact, like, again, no reference at all of Hangman Page on this show in any form. So after that, it's like 10 after 9 and we've got 50 minutes left in the show and one match to go. So everyone knew this trios match is going to kick ass because they are going to have no restrictions. Shivani interviews Christian Cage. His arm is in a brace and he responds to the challenge made by Jungle Boy, stating he extended the olive branch, and the personal things I said towards you were not from a place of malice. Yes, as he talked about Jungle Boy burying his father. and he wanted to motivate Jungle Boy. And you think you're better and smarter than you really are. You'll never be as smart as me. I'm a living legend, and you tried to maim me. And he insults the people of Cleveland being average, whereas Christian is special, and Jungle Boy will never be in his league, and accepts the challenge for the pay-per-view. So add it to the list. The growing list of pay-per-view matches.
It's one that I think we all sort of anticipated coming. To be honest, I had difficulty focusing in on the particulars of Christian's verbiage. I was still just kind of shell-shocked by what we had seen there. Yeah, this is a feud that I think is kind of being built along, more or less as you might expect. I, still do think that there is there's probably a fair bit, we talk about the whole, like, the schism between, AEW originals and, and outsiders, free agents, ex-WWE guys and whatnot, and how that's become this real storyline, between, Punk and Hangman Page and whatnot. And it sort of occurs to me that, the Jungle Boy is sort of one of the people who's maybe in, not, I wouldn't necessarily say a precarious, but whose spotlight has been somewhat reduced by that as one of your, like, top, not just one of your original AEW people, but as one of AEW's prospects that was very clearly a long-term project, one of the pillars, etc. And we've seen him, do pretty well in terms of the tag reign, but he still has a fair ways to go, I think, in terms of promo work, in terms of the building up of feuds, and the fact that, he's been paired with somebody like Christian, who is going, to sort of such extreme lengths in terms of trying to build this up to be a blood feud, is probably indicative of things. So, I think there's probably a fair bit of pressure, on Jack Perry to really deliver in this match and to sort of blow this feud off.
It's a very, very big match for him, and we'll go over the whole lineup at the end. Like, this is going to be a pretty crammed pay-per-view as well. Ricky Starks comes out. He hasn't been in a great mood lately. He thought that Hobbs was his friend, his partner in crime, and he would call him weekly when Starks broke his neck, and brought up Hobbs being a background player years ago for Britt Baker back at Daly's place, and I gave you a seat at my table and made sure the spotlight was big enough for both of us. He considered Hobbs a friend, but now he's a snake, and where he's from, they cut the heads off of snakes, and makes the challenge for All Out, which was just added to the graphic. Hobbs didn't even get the chance to respond like Christian. It's just, you're booked for the pay-per-view.
Two things I loved about this: the New Jack City reference, sit
That's
your
right, yes.
sit your $5 ass down before I make change, and also just the way that the ugly crying that sort of happened when Starks was talking about the fact that Hobbs went after his neck after, this guy had been phoning him after he broke that same neck. That was just great. I mean, it was
a little detail that we didn't focus on when the turn came, but it was great that it was, like, brought up here and focused on that. Like, this, it wasn't just you turning on me. It was you going after, like, my known weakness. Yes.
I say this every time I'm on any post show, pretty much, I feel, but there is so, the sky is the limit for Ricky Starks as a babyface, as I think promos like this prove. And I still think there's, a hell of a lot of upside in Hobbs as well. But, just, if you haven't yet, sink a whole bunch of stock into Ricky Starks.
So they plugged that next we're going to hear from Jon Moxley. I really liked the way that they handled this title match. It was like this shocking finish, and they showed replays of it, and it was like we're reacting to it, which is something that AEW doesn't do a whole lot of. It's always next segment, next, and we're moving. This was a chance, hey, something big happened, let's revisit it, because it was on everyone's mind. You even stated, like, in this promo, you were still, like, shell-shocked from this, so they were kind of on top of this. And Moxley is in the back. He's like, dude, this guy is just totally in the zone. He says that best in the world, my ass, and writes off the people that doubted him. They're the same people that wrote my obituary, a line like right out of Daniel Cormier from UFC 278 on Saturday night with Leon Edwards. And he is the answer to every problem in this industry is Jon Moxley. And there's no one like him in pro wrestling. I'm not just some guy. I'm the guy in this industry. There are no limitations. I don't follow any rules. My time, everyone talks about their time. When is their time? My time is right now. This didn't set up any pay-per-view, but man, was this a great promo.
It was a fantastic promo. Unlike Ricky Starks, as plenty of people were noting on Twitter, though, Jon Moxley was not citing his sources. And, I think a lot of people were drawn to the fact that there seemed to be these direct, Roman and Cena references in that. I have to imagine that was intentional, maybe just to stir the pot a little bit there. But yeah, boy, howdy. This is what Jon Moxley excels at, these sorts of promos. I mean, I feel as though we didn't talk about it, but there was something of a heelish, some booze, directed Punk's way coming out there. And I think heading into that match, it was difficult to not sort of want to root for Moxley in that match as somebody who had been sort of put aside, as somebody who, held the belt during, the whole lockdown period, right? And that kind of, less than glamorous period in company history, only for somebody like Punk to kind of come waltzing back to pro wrestling and everything. Factor in, the way in which his comeback story after, going to rehab and everything, I think really won people over as well. And regardless of what exactly is happening, with Punk, Page, and all these other, kind of bigger meta and business level questions there, just as a like face of the company champion who's going to hold the belt and cut promos like this, Moxley's firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, this was very much like the Japanese mentality when someone would come back from a big injury, like logically should not be able to go toe to toe with your interim or world champion. So then we got the big rundown Friday night on Rampage, which is being taped as we speak. House of Black taking on John Silver, Alex Reynolds, and mystery partner in the Trios tournament. Sammy Guevara and Ty Mello against Ruby Soho and Ortiz. Wardlow against Ryan Nemeth for the TNT title. Claudio versus Dustin Rhodes for the ROH title. And we will hear from TBS champion Jade Cargill. I would imagine setting up the Athena match for the pay-per-view as well.
Is Preston Vance injured or something like that? Is that what the TBA is there on the Dark Order?
Yeah, so they had explained that Evil Uno is off in Germany. Where they were doing the gaming thing. But yeah, they didn't add Preston Vance. So unless he is I don't know what is going on with him, because he was just on Dark this week, right?
Yeah, he was on Dark. As part of a trios match, they had their new trio pendulum bomb thing. He was on. Vance was there on Being the Elite, talking up the trios match and everything like that. It all seemed to be going ahead that way. I'm not really sure what to make of that.
I'm sure they will explain it, because that's the logical question you would have about 10. Dynamite next week. They just announced Bryan Danielson against Jake Hager and Tony Storm, and Hikaru Shida against Britt Baker and Jamie Hayter. We'll do the whole update for All Out at the end. They recapped Kenny Omega's return last week, and that takes us to the main event, pretty much the last half hour of the show. Will Ospreay and Aussie Open against Death Triangle. One of the most incredible weeks for any performer ever in Will Ospreay, when you if you go back in this 8-day period, beginning with Juice Robinson and concluding with this.
And there's also the the Mike Bailey and the Ricky Knight matches that I don't think anybody who wasn't in those buildings has seen yet, but I mean, we're all looking forward to seeing whenever Rev Pro releases this footage. I mean, yeah, just somebody who's just absolutely on fire right now. I
don't know if I want to see someone try and top this week. Like, I don't know if this should be like kind of the bar that is set, because that's an ungodly precedent that he has set with these matches that he has done. And I imagine the Speedball Ricky Knight Jr. matches are going to be right at that caliber as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this, when we were winding down the G1 last week, but, there's just not really a conversation to be had, as far as I'm concerned, about who the wrestler of the year is. Just when you look at just even sticking to his singles matches, the variety of companies, the different continents that he has wrestled on, the different styles, the different sorts of stories, you compare, that kind of like, gutsy kind of like, underdog, the light at the end of the tunnel match that he worked with Okada, versus the absolutely evil match that he worked with Oku to start the year. And it's just, he's been everywhere. He's been all things to all people. It's, we have just a few months left in the year, but the conversation's effectively over as far as I'm concerned.
Best friends are scouting in the crowd. Don Callis is out on commentary, and because the winners will be taking on the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. Ospreay and Phoenix begin, and this is just killer right off the bat. Jim Ross is constantly imploring AEW to sign Will Ospreay, so maybe Mega needs to CC Jim Ross
Talking about contract tampering
on that email. They get the heat on Ospreay all throughout the picture-in-picture. There were 3 breaks during this match, but I mean, in a half hour of television time, you're going to be at the mercy of these commercial breaks. But it was all picture-in-picture. He hit that beautiful Sky Twister press onto Pac and Penta on the floor. It would be impossible to recap all the spots in this match. Mark Davis is playing around with Phoenix, and then Aussie Open are delivering forearms, but Phoenix ducks, so they crash their forearms into one another. We see Penta flip from a Casadora into a crucifix bomb onto Kyle Fletcher, and then Davis stops the Fear Factor. Ospreay's in with the spinning roundhouse kick, and then Pac comes in with Ospreay, and this is the big showdown involving these two, and Ospreay holds on to the ropes, preventing a deadlift German, so Phoenix tight ropes across the top, PK sending Ospreay into the bridging German. This is when Don Callis brought up the time Kenny Omega sold out the Tokyo Dome with over 80,000 people.
All right. Well,
that was the year Wrestle Kingdom. You might have missed this. It was when they took the Tokyo Dome and stacked it on top of the Tokyo Dome, creating 2 domes, and sold out both.
That's why the ceiling looked so high that year. New Japan should have mentioned something about that.
That's it. We got a series of Ranas. Ospreay and Pac are going face to face on their knees. Crowd's going wild here. Ospreay pops up from a snap German and just hit an incredible Os cutter. Avalanche brainbuster by Pac, and then we go to the 3rd break. And we come back. Phoenix returns, lands a spin kick to Will on the turnbuckle, and hits a super Hurricane Rana. Ospreay lands on his feet. This was incredible. Rolling cutter by Phoenix, dives from the Lucha Brothers, and then Pac goes for the Black Arrow, landing on Ospreay's knees. Stormbreaker gets reversed into a snap Rana. Just everyone firing here on all cylinders. All 6 are in. We see a destroyer from Penta to Fletcher, and then Pac is on the top ring post. He hits a moonsault to the floor, right in front of who we assume is Kip Sabian with the box over his head. Because yes, folks, if you had been waiting over the past year, when is the Kip Sabian box over his head? When is it going to pay off? If you had August 24th in the pool, today was your lucky day, because Pac goes up to and takes the box off, but it is not Kip Sabian. It's somebody else. And boom, Kip Sabian attacks Pac, and unlike Dexter Loomis kidnapping someone, this does not cause a DQ. And Excalibur explains that the referee was dealing with everyone else. He didn't see any of this. The crowd is chanting Kip as he takes out Pac. And from there, we see a 3-on-1 with Aussie Open and Ospreay with Phoenix in the ring, leading to a super Os cutter, and Ospreay pins him in 25 minutes and 21 seconds, and the show ends with Omega and the Bucks coming out. So we will get Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay in the same ring next week in the Trios tournament. Omega was taped up like a mummy, and Ospreay's inviting him into the ring, but Don Callis prevented Omega from entering the ring. So interesting that we are doing pretty much the same story of Omega and Punk, that both have come back too early from injury, and they are continuing this, but that is a big Trios match for next week. But I mean, what can you say about this main event? I mean, was the scotch flowing?
Very heavily at this point, late into the card, and to your point earlier, exactly. As soon as the Moxley Punk match goes so slow, or goes so short rather, how much time is being given to this, and yeah, they. Look, it's these 6 guys. We know what they're capable of. They maximize this to the fullest. There was that. I mean, I've just got a little checklist of things here. There was that incredible double 2 double poison Ranas happening simultaneously between that Pac and Ospreay pulled off on the respective other 2 of the other teams to set up that stare down. There was that Pac somehow pulling a Rana reversal out of a Stormbreaker attempt. That was
incredible.
There was just so much here. The Ospreay, kind of Ospreay Ibushi callback spot. Just everything out of this was just incredibly hard hitting. I have to admit, I am a little bit surprised in terms of who ultimately won this. I assumed that it was going to be the good, the bad, and the bastard, that Death Triangle angle were going to be taking this one, if only because I was thinking that you would want to sort of save or protect the possibility of Omega and Ospreay meeting up, saving that up for an actual singles match. And I noticed afterwards, actually, as things were winding down, Excalibur almost never directly mentions PWG, but you felt like he just had to sort of say, like, yeah, that's right. I had the opportunity of calling their one and only singles match between these two guys 7 years ago in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. Like, he never rests on his laurels or wants to sort of humble brag about his role in the industry. But I felt like it was a well-deserved pull for him at that particular moment. But
this poor guy, match. They are doing the craziest end sequence, and he had to work in a BattleBots ad read. It was just, I mean, the guy is just, I mean, you can feed him anything and he will get it across. It's incredible. Like, I don't know how you work in anything during some of these sequences, but yeah, it was a phenomenal main event. Certainly go out of your way to check it out. And they got a ton of time. They dedicated the whole last half hour. And I would say, unlike in the build up to Forbidden Door, where I just felt like the Will Ospreay's first matches with AEW, to me, like, it's a really big deal, and they didn't feel like them.
Yep.
This one, it felt like, this almost felt like the unofficial Will Ospreay debut in AEW, as opposed to which were fine matches, but I wouldn't say they were built up in a memorable fashion or had that kind of lasting impact that this one I think will.
And I mean, I hope that the timing of it works out well, also in terms of just the amount of buzz that the final week of his G1 would have generated as well. Whereas it's possible that, I mean, I'm not really sure at this point, what percentage of the average AEW viewer is or is not familiar with Ospreay, but I think it's the easiest thing in the world, to actually communicate who he is. And one of the best ways of doing that is just giving him a whole half hour, of primetime American television.
Yes, so I'm sure Jim Ross was quickly burning up that New Japan contract as he was going to recruit Will Ospreay for a full-time contract afterwards. But that concluded the show. So you went off, without the knowledge of your title match for the pay-per-view, and they were really selling you on the conflict or the involvement that you will get next week with Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay in a ring together as the big selling feature for. I guess that'll be on the. Did they say for sure that's on the Wednesday? I assume it is.
That the witches, sorry?
That the trios match is on the Wednesday next week for Dynamite.
I believe they did. That's not on Dynamite. Yeah.
So there you go. 3 nights in Chicago next week for AEW. This was certainly very newsworthy edition of Dynamite. What did you think of the show overall? There's certainly many different takes to have, I guess.
I mean, those larger questions that we're talking about in terms of the storyline and the ultimate path for the heavyweight championship for CM Punk are ultimately going to be, I think, the main takeaway here. But given that, as I was saying before, I was having difficulty focusing on Christian and to a degree Starks, in the segments afterwards, that last half hour absolutely grabbed it back. And I do think that if there is, to our point at the beginning of this conversation, if there is some sort of question of, oh, hey, is WWE a little bit more worker friendly or whatever it is, I don't think you could have had a better advertisement or a better mission statement for the idea that, yeah, fine, Triple H is in charge and, Ricochet is going to get a push now and everything like that, but that AEW still is the actual, work rate in-ring wrestling company than that last match. And I don't know if that was intentional on their part to sort of have that as something of kind of a defining, this is what AEW is all about sort of point that they wanted to do in terms of laying out the show. But the fact that you end with that, and the fact that you ended with this stare down between two wrestlers who, I mean, Omega has no real affinity or no real lasting connection with the WWE, but basically, a entirely sort of unique to the New Japan and AEW crossover match that you are looking at, and that is another one of the big things that's being built out of here. That, I think, was also a smart thing to do at the same time as you were going to be having to deal with all of this ambiguity about Punk. So a very, very strong note to end on.
I'm going to steal from the WrestleNomics weekly game that they put out of guessing what the 18 to 49 demo is going to be for this show. So to put into context, the last 4 episodes for Dynamite, 0.33, 0.32, .33, which was the Jericho Moxley match, and last week a .30. So tonight, with all of the hype for Moxley and Punk, what do you see the show doing in the demo?
I'm not sure if they're getting to a 0.4 or not.
I would say that would be beyond expectations.
I'll go 0.37.
0.37. All right. I think it's going to be. I'm gonna go 3.6. That's okay. my prediction. So I think you and I are fairly in line here. But there was, if we were talking the beginning of the year like this, you would think like slam dunk. This is going to be a 0.4. But we'll see. That'll be a very very focused upon and scrutinized number coming out of tonight's show. We have a few super chats here, so let's go to Hansi. With all these interim titles vacant is never going to sign with this company. Good to see Bruce Lord recapping with Pollock. There you go. Hansi. All in on Bruce Lord. Who are we representing tonight, Bruce?
Author and Punisher, a American, nominally industrial band, but a band that crosses over with kind of doom and sludge metal a little bit. The T-shirt actually displays the literal instruments and triggers that the dude behind the project has built. He's an actual engineer, so he has built his own very complex kind of pneumatic pieces of mechanical engineering that are used to actually manufacture the music. So yeah, so shout out to Tristan Shawn and Author and Punisher.
If Bruce didn't explain that, I was going to. Next up is John. AEW is very specific with their language, like the Darby Best in the World promo. Mox said, "My time is now," twice. Is Cena in for All Out? And that's why they shifted the unification to tonight. I do not think that, thank you for the super chat, John. I do not think that Jon Moxley and John Cena are headlining All Out. That's my prediction.
That might end up beating, the previous All Out record, though. So, hey, if there's a way.
Yes, that would be that would certainly be a way to top 205,000 buys. All right, let's go to the forum here. I will edit some of these down. Benjamin from Toronto. That was not the finish any of us expected for the Moxley Punk match. Actually, that's a good question. What were you expecting, Bruce, from this match tonight?
I was sort of expecting either a disputed finish, coming out of some sort of, double pin or something like that, or possibly some MJF shenanigans to get the title onto Mox and to then spin off. Because, ultimately, going back to the last time we saw MJF, my vision for this was ultimately effectively sort of a double turn for both Punk and MJF, with them sort of playing, with Punk sort of occupying the Cena role and MJF occupying the Punk role coming out of that. So again, I've been really holding on to a lot of faith in the paying off of all of the MJF stuff, but I don't know. It's tough to see how he's going to be reintroduced at this point. So that was my initial prediction.
Benjamin writes, "I love AEW. I love that it exists and there are more options for talent to get on TV and work. But Tony Khan seems to have a cognitive bias that impedes him from booking women fairly. Thunder Rosa is the AEW champion. She suffered an injury that will prevent her from competing and defending it All Out, and they're going to crown an interim champion. This announcement happened in a 30-second backstage promo." And he compares this to Punk getting the chance to deliver a similar announcement and do so in the ring in front of the crowd with an entrance and pop. Yes, Punk is more popular than Rosa, but they could have given her the respect of letting her address the house in the ring. Ricky Starks is going to be a big deal. I feel like both he and Hobbs will come out of this feud as bigger stars. And says, "Thanks, Bruce Lord, for introducing me to Ulterior. I love a good body batch of bangers. They got some." So there you go.
Yeah.
Her niece.
Do you want me to...
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on the Thunder Rosa aspect of this question?
It's a good point. It is a good point. Obviously CM Punk is, the biggest star in the company and is going to be given, the mic whenever they can afford to do so. But yeah, given that, I think, as far as I know, I hadn't seen any talk of Rosa being injured. I think a couple of people in the chat were mentioning that it was a somewhat known thing. I hadn't heard anything about it, and it came as a bit of a surprise to me. So yeah, having her at least come out and announce it, and then maybe having that somehow lead into the women's match or something like that might have been a way to do this, to give that belt a little bit more shine.
Yeah, just looking at this, her last match looks to have been August 10th, which was a Dark Elevation taping where she teamed with Hikaru Shida against Amy Sakura, Marina Shafir, and Nyla Rose. So that was the week they were in Minneapolis. All right, we continue on with her niece from New York City, Jericho and Danielson. Garcia on a pole match at All Out. That's his suggestion. Wardlow went from 100 to 0 pretty quickly since the MJF program and winning the TNT title. The summer of Punk turned into the summer of Mox, and I'm very glad he has the full title now. That look that Punk gave Moxley at the end has to mean Punk is returning at the end of All Out to take out the champion and turn heel. 1 week build for the main event at All Out. Ospreay just picking up where he left off at the G1. Thank you for the G1 review shows and recommending his matches. Lastly, you guys are not letting Way get started slowly, having him join you for a 5 to 6 hour show next Sunday. We just had 8 match announcements with more to come since Moxley doesn't have a match yet. Oh yeah, it's going to be a marathon that day when you have Worlds Collide and then this pay-per-view, which might be 5 hours for all we know. Saeed from Vancouver. I agree with Benjamin. Them announcing Thunder Rosa is injured in a 30-second backstage segment was disrespectful. At least do it in the ring. For the Fatal 4-Way, I can see Storm getting the belt back before the rematch with Rosa when she gets back. All Out is really shaping up to be a fun card. The Trios match is absolutely a match of the year contender for me. Punk and Moxley was a surprise not being in the main event, but maybe the finish explains it. Not sure if this is a work or not, but my friend that was near the front row heard the doctor tell the referee to end the match before Moxley went after Punk and put the match away. I think that was more so everyone contributing to the story.
Yeah. I mean, it was well done. I think, like, again, to your point about it, kind of looking and feeling like a UFC sort of, flash knockout or something like that. Like, we've seen them do this before, right? Like the Danielson, injury angle, getting his leg trapped and whatnot. I think AEW's generally done a good job of working storyline injuries in, which, I mean, hey, reactions like this are part of what they're shooting for.
Cody from Maine. Great promos and phenomenal main event that sets the stage for some very exciting matches. Punk versus Moxley, which I put right up there with the shock of Lesnar Goldberg and Brody Lee versus Cody Rhodes. They set the stage well by starting it at the halfway point of the show and mentioning that the match could go long, only to go with the story of Punk coming back too soon and losing in 3 minutes. Not something you could pull off as a pay-per-view main event or had you started the match at 9:55 p.m. It's an interesting enough story without the potential backstage drama being legitimate. But with that being a factor in everyone's mind, it takes all of this to the next level. The questions of whether or not this was always the plan, is this Punk's punishment, etc. Regardless, it made for an incredibly shocking moment and cemented this as a Dynamite that will be remembered and talked about for a long time. Brian from New Jersey. A wild show with some unexpected and very unexpected turns to build All Out. My biggest negatives about it came towards the end with Kip Sabian being crammed into the main event and no indication given to us about what the world title match will be at All Out. Other than that, I enjoyed Death Triangle against a United Empire more than last week's Elite main event. I think Ricky Starks is cutting stronger babyface promos than Jungle Boy, and Punk versus Moxley threw me for a loop, but I wasn't disappointed in it. I thought it played out smartly, struck me as hopefully the first chapter in a longer story, and I'm happy to see Jon Moxley firmly take his place on top. He's the most protected guy in wrestling next to Roman Reigns. I would say, Bruce, that in all of this, when you look at Jon Moxley kind of being put into this interim title role, and that, as you mentioned earlier, the idea that he very well could have just been in place that, okay, he's the guy holding the belt till Punk gets back. And instead, it's like this guy, to me, is having this incredible run this year. Yeah. I would say that people are going to put this title run as the more memorable one than his first title run that was happening with the handicap of the pandemic.
It's happening in front of live crowds. Again, as I referred to before, it's buoyed by, I think, the fact that everybody is just, rooting for, Jonathan Good, the person here, to come out of recovery and excel and succeed, at that sort of a level here. So, yeah, no, I think that, it might have been kind of he's the guy who's around to sort of take this interim belt, but he's absolutely made the most of it. And to Brian's point there, speaking of making the most of it, I don't know that Kip Sabian could have asked for a more high profile spot to be pulled back out in. As somebody who's been watching him just loaf around on Dark for the last year, I was legitimately wondering if we'd ever actually see him on main television again. So the fact that he's jumping right into a program with Pac, his face was right up there with Ospreay's and everybody else's in an incredibly hot match. I don't think he's complaining about that being the moment for his reintroduction.
Andrew from St. John, when they announced the title match for the middle of the show, I thought they were telegraphing a shenanigans finish, but instead they went with another 3-minute nightmare for Punk in Chicago. This was a wild, exciting finish to a show, except that it was business as usual after. I thought they may deliver a big angle at the end to top it even further, but they didn't. Rosa is one of my favorite wrestlers, and I hope she comes back strong. I think they really bungled the announcement of the replacement four-way, as when Baker and King got into the ring, they presented Storm's opponent as an uncertainty on commentary, but then flashed the graphic on screen. Not interested in seeing Will Ospreay at all. Love what they're doing with Daniel Garcia. He's way bigger now than he would have been if they simply put him in the Blackpool Combat Club to start, and he gives the show a 4 out of 5. We will check in with MJ. People will love or hate the different approach AEW is taking to booking pay-per-views. It's all in the journey, though, right? If fans want slow but telegraphed stories made for 5-minute video packages, that product exists. AEW has proven you can splatter a lot of stuff together to produce unique and exciting shows and ultimately have matches people want to see on pay-per-view. It's a product that disrupted status quo and has done things differently, from having a first pay-per-view with no TV to having no main event yet for this year's All Out. I think what rubs people the wrong way about some of this is how starkly different what AEW has been doing is. Consider the Forbidden Door build and the result of that show. The ROH pay-per-view was a commercial success after everyone wondered why it was being given time on television. Because it's different doesn't mean it's not working, and that's what a disruptive does. It's all in the journey. Tonight's journey featured a unique TV title match and Will Ospreay sharing a ring for 20 minutes with Pac and the Lucha Brothers before a hyped stare down with Kenny Omega. So there you go. Anyway, wanted to leave feedback for Bruce. Always enjoy when he's on. So there you go. The fan base is just growing, Bruce.
Cheers, MJ. I mean, that's probably because we gave him the postmarks pop, a few months ago. But thanks very much for that, MJ. And yeah, I generally agree with that, right? I think he's making a point kind of similar to the one that I was making earlier, which is that the goodwill that they've earned with the fan base and the general, kind of way that some of the times when they have been making what seem to be kind of unpredictable or questionable booking decisions have generally panned out to good pay-per-view buys and to good pay-per-view product at the end of the day. So it's a weird one. It's a weird one that we've been thrown here for sure. But they've proven that they can pull themselves out of tailspins that are maybe nearly as strange as this one.
I think that's a great point, that in all of this, whatever this match is going to turn out to be, I think you are going to have that audience. I would venture to guess that anyone listening to this show and, probably any regular AEW pay-per-view buyer that was buying the show 24 hours ago is still planning on buying this pay-per-view.
Yeah. It is just the question of to what degree there are, casual, viewers who are maybe brought back in, who bought All Out last year just for the sake of CM Punk's return, but then maybe didn't stick around to watch Dynamite over the next year or so.
Yeah. And if this kind of a 3-minute match enhances people's, desire to want to see the match again.
It's a different type of storytelling. Yeah.
Robbie from London, what a great Dynamite. The absolute result I wanted from that world title match I never thought I'd get. A killer main event, and as the biggest of Impact fans, I absolutely marked out, edge of my seat and hands on my head for the Motor City Machine Guns reveal. Can't wait to see them at All Out. Jordan in the Bronx, it's great that AEW is not afraid to make statements. When there's a match between two top guys on TV, fans have been conditioned to the WWE booking of doing a non-finish to get to the next part of that feud. People predicted a run-in from MJF or Hangman or something to necessitate adding a stipulation for a rematch. Moxley squashing Punk was the furthest from anyone's mind. Completely shocking result, and as of the end of the show, there's no world title match booked or any indication of who's next. This unpredictability is great, as I'm able to turn my brain off and enjoy the ride. I'm sorry, but just reading that, it's like, I don't know what I'm paying for. This is awesome. So anyway, yes, the plot thickens. Thunder Rosa being hurt is another bummer, and a tough hand dealt to the women's division after Statlander's injury. On the plus side, it's great to see Sheeta back in focus. A great point, that this comes in concert with Chris Statlander being hurt on top of things. So again, I'm hoping this is not a significant injury for Thunder Rosa, and that it's only a short time back. But for Chris Statlander, like a torn ACL right after recovering from that, it's just terrible.
Terrible timing, and I really liked, I've always liked Statlander, but I really liked the kind of the relaunched, more serious, slightly harder edged version of her that we had seen, obviously mixing it up, with the baddies in the short term. But I think that, I was sort of talking about the question of whether or not, can she be the actual first real contender to beat Jade, who would actually seem like they had a real chance at doing it. So yeah, it really, really, really sucks for her if we're talking about, the difficulties that the AEW women's division has faced, both in terms of, injuries and booking.
Two more here. Kate from Montreal writes, easily one of the most chaotic episodes of Dynamite ever. I have no idea what's going on with Punk and Mox. Thunder Rosa getting injured is a curveball. The Machine Guns versus FTR has to have been on a number of wish lists that people never thought they were getting. The main event was tremendous. If Moxley versus Punk ran shorter than anticipated, which given that the way they appeared to be stretching in the back half seems possible, it also means that they likely had to fill more time than they originally planned. Unreal either way. Fuck physics. Give me more like this. And the last word of the night from Alex Patel. That was like a Punk UFC match.
Maybe he was the doctor, who was like whispering and sort of saying like, no, his foot's injured. We got to throw in the towel here and stop it. Alex was able to diagnose that.
So I said that we'd quickly look at, so this is the updated lineup for the pay-per-view. We have 8 matches here. So the trios final for the championship, Wardlow and FTR against Jay Lethal and the Machine Guns, the 4-way for the interim women's title, the Casino ladder match, which will probably be all the spare pieces into that one, Chris Jericho against Bryan Danielson, Keith Lee and Swerve Strickland against the Acclaim for the tag titles, Christian Cage against Jungle Boy, and Ricky Starks against Powerhouse Hobbs. And they have not done any follow-up on that angle when Eddie Kingston said that he had gotten the contract or that the contract had been issued for him and Sammy Guevara.
That's right. I mean, there was
so many no follow-up on that.
So many damn moving pieces at this point. We are getting, I think Tay and Sammy are in a mixed tag. Is that Rampage that's happening right now? Yeah. So maybe we get something, some word coming out of that as far as Kingston's direction goes. Because he was kind of somebody who was conspicuous by his absence. But as we've, as you and so many other people have talked about, like it's a jammed enough roster, and so wrestling forward that not everybody is going to be appearing on every single episode. Do you have any guesses? I mean, generally, the kind of the Joker spot in the Casino Battle Royale or Casino ladder match has been left. Oh no, wait! But this is the ladder match, so this isn't the deck. We don't have the Joker spot here. Any predictions as to maybe somebody returning, coming back from an injury, or making a debut?
Who do we have that are the key ones that are injured? Like you have Cole and like Red Dragon that have kind of been at the sidelines. I don't know if that really makes sense to put someone of like the caliber of an Adam Cole there. Geez, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I haven't given it much thought at all. Anyone that comes to mind for you?
No, nobody in particular really, except for possibly, Cole was the one thought that I had. But again, I don't know if we really have a sense of how long their injuries are going to be. It's also one of those cases, I think, where I think the sheer number of, including some, technically not yet signed, but talents that are starting to show up much more frequently, on Dark and some of the other shoulder program, your Trustbusters and things like that. It is a very, very jammed out roster right now, and so after the big Claudio reveal, I don't know if we're going to be getting any more like patented TK surprises in the short to medium future.
Yeah, I mean, they have really been a staple of AEW, but at the same time, like I'd be more than fine if just, pick someone on your roster that it's like we see like this is going to be our 6-month project and let's go that way. Like the idea of Daniel Garcia winning that casino ladder match and you come out of it, it's like that sends him into that Buffalo show. It's like he has a reason to be on that show, cut a big promo. Like I love that idea of like, okay, Daniel Garcia, he doesn't have to challenge for the title this week, but now we are putting him in that position where, it's someone that already we've gotten behind, has that momentum, and this pushes him that much further, as opposed to just somebody that's going to be like a Dante Martin, who nothing against, but it's the idea, okay, he wins and he gets a fun match on television, but we're only going so far, at least currently, with him.
And if you're putting Garcia in that spot of a sort of an open-ended or 1 month from now, a 2 month from now sort of challenge, you can wring so much more out of the path and the road between, the sports entertainer and the wrestler, life choices that he has lying in front of them. So yeah, that would make a good deal of sense, I think.
All right. Well, is your head spinning after doing the whole Dynamite routine tonight, Bruce.
I feel entirely, just blown away and exhausted. I'm having difficulty remembering that I technically did see, a Jay Lethal and Dax match. I think I might have seen Billy Gunn wrestle a match a while ago as well. I couldn't really tell you at this point though, John.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for jumping on board and all of your great work throughout the G1. Bruce was doing not just podcasts, but also reports on the site with Mark Buckledy and a great breakdown, a report card for all 28 participants in the G1 that you can go check out in our G1 section, providing letter grades for everybody, how they performed throughout the G1. So really great stuff, Bruce, and we appreciate all the time that you have provided coming on with us.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been great to come onto the podcasts and everything, and talk about AEW or New Japan. But yeah, I sunk a good amount of time into that report card piece there. Really enjoyed writing it. Really enjoyed formalizing my thoughts at the end of a pretty, I think, kind of noteworthy G1, even if it wasn't the most heavily hyped or buzzed about. And of all things, I got some comments from Yujiro lovers in response to this, sort of asking how I could possibly denigrate the Tokyo Pimps with the letter grade that I gave him. But there it is. It's one person's opinion. It's worth that and not a lot more. But if you are interested in kind of filling in some blanks in what happened in the G1, yeah, that report card is up on Post Wrestling right now.
And my last question for you, if I want to hear more about Author and Punisher, what would be the best podcast for me to go listen to?
Oh, yeah. If you're the sort of person who's into Author and Punisher, or Ulterior, who also got mentioned in the feedback, or what we like to call darker alternatives, my main online hustle is idieudie.com, a website that I run with my good friend Alex Kennedy, and the accompanying We Have a Technical podcast, which deals with goth music, industrial music, dark wave music, EBM, stuff of that genre. We try to keep it pretty conversational, pretty friendly, pretty approachable to the point that Post Wrestling's own Wei Ting was a special guest back on episode 400 of our podcast a little while ago. So you can find that at idieudie.com and by looking up We Have a Technical wherever you find your podcasts.
All right. That's definitely go check out all of that. And I'm sure in the near future, you will be hearing more of Bruce here on the Post Wrestling Network. So that's going to wrap things up. I'm going to be back on Friday night with Kate from Montreal. We will go through SmackDown and Rampage heading into the weekend. And thanks to everyone joining us, a lot of people in the live chat tonight. Or if you downloaded it afterwards, we will take the numbers and the listens wherever they come from. So thanks to everybody for joining me. And that concludes Rewind-A-Dynamite.